Let me save my game because I've never really played through Gen 1. I didn't grow up. I was kind of old for Pokemon, so I didn't really grow up with the original games. I know this is completely. I don't have my lighting up. Nothing. I don't care. We're getting toward the end of this very emotionally tiresome book. But yeah, I saved playing Fire Red. I don't know. I had an old Advance sitting around, Game Boy Advance, you know, a little SP sitting around. I was like, I don't know what the fuck, play it. Even in the prisoner's dock, it's interesting to hear people talk about you. And during the summations by the prosecutor and my lawyer, there was a lot said about me, maybe about more about me than about my crime. But were there two speeches so different after all? My lawyer raised his arms and pleaded guilty, but with an explanation. The prosecutor waved his hand and proclaimed my guilt, but without an explanation. One thing bothered me a little, though. Despite everything that was on my mind, I felt like intervening every now and then, but my lawyer kept telling me, just keep quiet. It won't do your case any good. Condescending bastard. In a way, they seemed to be arguing the case as if it had nothing to do with me. Everything was happening without my participation. My fate was being decided without anyone so much as asking my opinion. There were times when I felt like breaking in all of a sudden and saying, hey, wait a minute, who's the accused here? Being the accused counts for something, and I have something to say, but on second thought, I didn't really have anything to say. Besides, I have to admit that whatever interest you can get people to take in you doesn't last very long. Let me repeat this again for YouTubers out there. Besides, I have to admit that whatever interest you can get people to take in you doesn't last very long. Try reading a book to your audience of no one. I'm insane. For example, I got bored very quickly with the prosecutor's speech. Only bits and pieces, a gesture, or a long but isolated tirade caught my attention or aroused my interest. The gist of what he was saying, if I understood him correctly, was that my crime was premeditated. At least that's what he tried to show. As he himself said, I will prove it to you, gentlemen, and I will prove it in two ways. First, in the blinding clarity of the facts, and then the second, in the dim light cast by the mind of this criminal soul. He reminded the court of my insensitivity, of my ignorance when asked of maman's age, of my swim the next day with a woman, of the Fernando movie, and finally talking of Marie home with me. It took me a few minutes to understand the last part because he kept on saying his mistress, and to me, she was Marie. Then he came to my business, to the business with Raymond. I thought this was his way of viewing the events. Had a certain consistency. What he was saying was plausible. I had agreed with Raymond to write the letter in order to lure his mistress and submit her to mistreatment by a man of doubtful morality. I had provoked Raymond's adversaries at the beach. Raymond had been wounded. I had asked him to give me his gun. I had gone back alone intending to use it. I had shot the Arab as I had planned. I had waited, and to make sure I had done the job right, I fired four more shots calmly, point blank, thoughtfully as it were. And there you have it, gentlemen, said the prosecutor. I have retraced for you the course of events which led this man to kill with full knowledge of his actions. I stress this point, he said, for this is no ordinary murder, no thoughtless act for which you might find mitigating circumstances. This man, gentlemen, this man is intelligent. You heard him, didn't you? He knows how to answer. He knows the value of words. And no one can say that he acted without realizing what he was doing. I was listening, and I could hear that I was being judged intelligent. But I couldn't quite understand how an ordinary man's good qualities could be some crushing accusation against against a guilty man. At least that was what struck me. I stopped listening to the prosecutor until I heard him say, "He has so much as expressed any remorse." Never, gentlemen. Not once during this preliminary hearings did this man. We're still in the preliminaries, for Christ's sake. Jesus. They're in the preliminary hearings. These were referring back to like when you're still shell shocked that you're in jail. Like, oh, I'm being accused of murder. Oh, shit, I did just shoot some dude on the beach. Oh, fuck, I gotta go through this now and go through the motions and all the absurdities of it, and yet endure this shit. Never, gentlemen, not once during the preliminary hearings did this man show emotion over his heinous offense. At this point, he turned in my direction, pointed his finger at me, and went on attacking me without me ever really understanding why. Of course, I couldn't help admitting that he was right. I didn't feel much remorse for what I had done, but I was surprised by how relentless he was. I would have liked to have tried explaining to him cordially, almost affectionately, that I had never been able to truly feel remorse for anything. My mind was always on what was coming next, today or tomorrow. But naturally, given the position I'd been put in, I couldn't talk to anyone in that way. I didn't have the right to show any feeling or goodwill, and I tried to listen again because the prosecutor started talking about my soul. He said that he had peered into it, and he had found nothing, gentlemen of the jury. He said that the truth was that I didn't have a soul, and that nothing human, not one of the moral principles that govern men's hearts, was within my reach. Of course, he added, we cannot blame him for this. We cannot complain that he lacks what it was not in his power to acquire. But here in this court, the wholly negative virtue of tolerance must give way to the sterner but loftier virtue of justice, especially when the emptiness of a man's heart becomes, as we find it has in this man, an abyss. Hi, how you doing? Threatening to swallow up society. Once again, Jesus, I get credited for so much, and I mean, look, you name yourself Void, everybody's like, oh, you named yourself the Abyss, blah, blah, blah. It was then that he talked about my attitudes toward my mom. He repeated that he had said earlier in the proceedings, but it went on much longer than what he was talking about my crime. So long, in fact, that finally all I was aware of was how hot a morning it was. At least until the prosecutor stopped, and after a short silence, continued in a very low voice, filled with conviction. Tomorrow, gentlemen, this same court is to sit in judgment of the most monstrous of crimes, the murder of a father. According to him, the imagination recoiled before such an odious offense. He went so far as to hope the human justice would mete out punishment unflinchingly, but he wasn't afraid to say it. My callousness inspired in him a horror nearly greater than that which he felt at the crime of parricide, killing of a father. And also, according to him, a man who is morally guilty of killing his mother, morally guilty of killing his mother, he showed up to her funeral. She was living in a fucking home. He forgot that she was, what, 68 or 67. He forgot because she had just died and it didn't seem that important. These motherfuckers do not get a stoic, just a plain stoic. This isn't even. I'm getting myself started. Killing his mother serves himself or society in the same way as the man who raises a murderous hand against the father who begat him. In any case, the one man paved the way for the deeds of the other, in a sense foreshadowed and even legitimized them. I am convinced, gentlemen, he added, raising his voice, that you will not think it too bold of me if I suggest that the man, I'm sorry, the man who is seated in the dock right now, is also guilty of the murder to be tried in this court tomorrow. He must be punished accordingly. Here the prosecutor wiped his face, which was glistening with sweat. He concluded by saying that his duty was a painful one. Sure it is. He wants to nail this fucker to the wall. He doesn't. Yeah, it's surely a painful one. but that he would carry it out resolutely. He stated that I had no place in a society whose most fundamental rules I ignored, and that I could not appeal to the same human heart whose elementary response I knew nothing of. I ask you for this man's head, he said. You know, these are French people. So, guillotine was still par for the course. I'm not going to try to speak French, fuck it. And I do so with a heart at ease, for it is in the course of what has been a long career I have had the occasion to call for the death penalty. Never as strongly as today as have I felt this painful duty made easier, lighter, clearer by the certain knowledge of a sacred imperative, and by the horror I feel when I look into a man's face and all I see is a monster. That unfeeling bastard forgot how old his mother was, right after she died. Oops. Fucking unfeeling bastard. He killed her. He killed her by forgetting and not feeling particularly horrified that she died when she had been like sitting there waiting for death. In a home where everyone was sitting waiting for fucking death. I mean, it wasn't palliative care, but I mean, it's the 50s. Jesus Christ. When the prosecutor returned to his seat, there was a rather long silence. My head was spinning with heat and astonishment. The presiding judge cleared his throat and in a very low voice asked me if I had anything to add. I stood up, and since I did wish to speak, I said almost at random, in fact, that I had never intended to kill the Arab. The judge replied by saying that at least that was an assertion, that until that he hadn't quite grasped the nature of my defense, and that before hearing from my lawyer, he would have been happy to have me state precisely the motives for my act. Jesus, what a fucking thought! Rather than fighting this emotional court, fighting this in the heart, how about fighting it on the goddamn facts? I don't know. What an idea. Fumbling a little with my words and realizing how ridiculous I sounded. I mean, you're in front of a court for the first time. I blurted out that it was because of the sun. People laughed. My lawyer threw up his hands. And immediately after that, he was given the floor. But he stated that it was late and that he would need several hours. He requested that the trial be reconvened in the afternoon. The court granted his motion. That afternoon, the big fans were still churning the thick air in the courtroom, and the jurors' brightly colored fans were all moving in unison. It seemed to me as if the lawyer's summation would never end. At one point, I thought I listened because he was saying, "It is true, I killed a man." He went on like that, saying "I" whenever he was speaking about me. I was completely taken aback. I leaned over to one of the guards and asked him why he was doing that. He told me to keep quiet, and a few seconds later he added, "All lawyers do that." I thought it was a way to exclude me even further from the case, reduce me to nothing, and in a sense, substitute himself for me. But I think I was already very far removed from the courtroom. He hasn't been much of a part. I mean, he finally blurts something out to the judge one fucking time, and it's like the judge is, "Oh, you didn't mean to kill the Arab dude on the beach. Oh, your defense lawyer never mentioned this. He was just saying how much you loved your mom and that you were a good citizen." Fucking stupid. And in the last stream, when I said retarded, this is the type of behavior I'm talking about. Anything that retards the promotion of positive growth in human society, thought, and anything that would provoke thought or logic and reason. Anything that retards that, that's fucking retarded. Anything that retards logic, reason, sense, just common sense, even in this case. I mean, well, that's kind of the whole point of this book, is common sense is not so common, and people will die because of it. Oh, did I spoil the end? Oops. But I think it was already very far removed from the courtroom. Besides, my lawyer seemed ridiculous to me. He rushed through a plea of provocation, like as if the Arab had done something from the beach. And then he too talked about my soul. Like saving it, what? But to me, he seemed to be a lot less talented than the prosecutor. I too, he said, have peered into this man's soul, but unlike the esteemed representative of the government prosecutor's office, I did see something there, and I can assure you that I read it like an open book. What he read was that I was an honest man, a steadily employed, tireless worker, loyal to the firm that employed him, well liked, sympathetic to the misfortunes of others, like a human, basically. He said I was human. Great. To him, I was a model son who had supported his mother as long as he could. This was very true. In the end, I hoped that a home for the aged would give the old woman the comfort that, with my limited means, I could not provide for her. Gentlemen, he added, I'm amazed that so much has been made of this home. For after all, if it were necessary to prove this, the usefulness of the and importance of such institutions, all one would have to say is that it is the state itself which subsidizes them. The only thing is, he didn't say anything about the funeral, and I thought that he was a glaring omission in his summation. But all the long speeches, all the interminable days and hours that people had spent talking about my soul had left me with the impression of a colorless, swirling river that was making me dizzy. Like I said, I might get through 5, I might get through 6 today. There's nobody here, so probably just 5. Screw it. In the end, all I remember is that while my lawyer went on talking, I could hear through the expanse of chambers and courtrooms an ice cream vendor blowing his trumpet out on the street. I think a ice cream truck today. I was assailed by memories of a life that wasn't mine anymore. Hey, Kiddio. Um, Hopefully Kiddio's in bed at this point. It is 9 o'clock almost where you are. How you doing, Daddy-O? Uh, we are still doing literature. Okay, maybe now I will do chapter 6 that there's somebody actually bloody well viewing it. So we're at the courtroom scene. We're basically just at the end of summations where he noticed that his own lawyer didn't say shit about his own mother's, about maman's funeral, as the French would say. Yeah, okay. So we're back to, yeah, this was not made family friendly. This wasn't marked as for kids. That's water, not vodka, people. Sorry. Wish I could be a drunk for you, but can't be a drunk every day for you. I was assailed by memories of a life that wasn't mine anymore. He's hearing the ice cream man outside. But one in which I had found the simplest and most lasting joys, the smells of summer, the part of town I loved, a certain evening sky, Marie's dresses, and the way she laughed. The utter pointlessness of whatever I was doing there seized me by the throat, and all I wanted was to get it over with, and get back to my cell and sleep. I barely even heard when my lawyer, wrapping up, exclaimed that the jury surely would not send an honest, hard-working man to his death because he had lost control of himself for one moment, and then he asked them to find extenuating circumstances for a crime for which I was already suffering the most agonizing of punishments, eternal remorse. Oh, yeah. Juries love that. Oh, he's going to feel this in his heart forever. I'm sorry, if I were in the jury, I'd be like, he hesitated and still shut off 4 fucking rounds. I mean, like, the case, if I was taking this prima facie, if I was taking this on its face, and I was given as it described what evidence is given, even ignoring all the emotional manipulation done by the lawyers, it would still be, well, I mean, like, he paused and then shot him again. Like, that's got to be intentional. I mean, like, there's no, you don't just go, oh, hold on, I already shot you once. Hold on, let me wipe that. Okay, now. Nobody pew-pews like that. That's just weird, you know? Anyway, court was adjourned and my lawyer sat back down. He looked exhausted, but his colleagues came over to shake his hand. I heard, that was brilliant. One of them even appealed to me as a witness. Wasn't he? Asking the guy who was on trial for, wasn't your lawyer great? Fuck you. I'm on trial for murder. He said, I agreed, but my congratulations weren't sincere because I was too tired. Meanwhile, the sun was getting low outside and it wasn't as hot anymore. From what street noises I could hear, I sensed the sweetness of evening coming on. There we were, we all were waiting, and what we were all waiting for was really concerned only me. I looked around the room again. Everything was the same as it had been the first day. My eyes met those of a little robot woman, that reporter in the gray jacket. That reminded me that I hadn't tried to catch Marie's eye once during the trial. I hadn't forgotten about her, it had just been too much to do. I saw her sitting between Celeste and Raymond. She made a little gesture as if to say at last. There was a little worried smile on her face, but my heart felt nothing, and I couldn't even return her smile. The judges came back in. Remember, this is France, more than one judge. A triumvirate, three. Very quickly, a series of questions was read to the jury. I heard guilty of the murder, premeditated, extenuating circumstances. The jurors filed out, and I was taken to the little room where I had waited before. My lawyer joined me. He was talkative and spoke to me more confidently and cordially. Oh, this is always the end of the trial. They're always like, "Yeah, you fucking got it. You nailed this thing. You got this. You're getting off. You don't have a worry." Every lawyer's gonna say that, dude. What are they gonna do? Like, oh man, I fucked up. You're gonna hang for this. No lawyer in his right mind's ever gonna say that. Okay, the jurors filed out, and I was taken to the little room. He thought that everything would go well, and that I would get off with a few years in prison, or hard labor at least. I asked him whether he thought there was any chance of overturning the verdict if it was unfavorable. This is where the entire book takes a really serious turn. If any of you have watched a court drama, Killa, what's going on? We're finishing the book because I got a teacher here and now a thinker here as well. So I'm finishing and giving. This is the mad turn of the book. Okay, we're at the end of the trial. Okay, we're one chapter away from finishing the book. That's why we're finishing it. The rest is all glad handing at the end, like congratulations pages at the end of this fucking book, which I should have used as rolling papers years ago. But no, this is the end of the trial, and he's talking to his lawyer after a summation, after the jury has been left to deliberate, and the judges are called back in, and as this is happening, his lawyer is like, "Hey, dude, you're gonna be fine. Maybe a couple of years in prison, hard labor. You're fine. You're not. There's no big deal." And he says, "Well, if it's not a favorable verdict, can we get it overturned?" He said no. His tactic had been not to file any motions so as not to antagonize the jury. He explained to me that verdicts weren't set aside just like that for nothing. That seemed obvious, and I accepted his logic. Looking at it objectively, it made perfect sense. Otherwise, that would be too much pointless paperwork. Anyway, he said, we can always appeal, but I'm convinced that the outcome will be favorable. And by favorable, remember, he was saying years of hard labor in prison. We waited a long time, almost 3/4 of an hour, I think. Like, as if that's a long time to wait for your lawyer. Then a bell rang. My lawyer left me, saying, the foreman of the jury is going to announce the verdict. You'll only be brought in for the passing of the sentence. Doors slammed. People running on stairs somewhere, but I couldn't tell if they were nearby or far away. Big courtroom, of course. Yep. Then I heard a muffled voice reading something in the courtroom. Oh, yeah. All that bullshit. All rise and sit. When the bell rang again, when the door to the dock opened, what rose to meet me was the silence in the courtroom. Silence, and the strange feeling I had when I noticed the young reporter had turned his eyes away. I didn't look in Marie's direction. I didn't have time to, because the presiding judge told me in bizarre language, Latin probably, that I was to have my head cut off in the public square in the name of the French people. Then it seemed to me that I suddenly knew what was on everyone's face. It was a look of consideration, I'm sure. The policemen were very gentle with me. The lawyer put his hand on my wrist. I wasn't thinking about anything anymore. But the presiding judge asked me if I had anything. Jesus, I hate this fucking book. Now, it's more that I just hate people. The fact that a group of 12 people in 3 fucking suits with fucking weird wigs on can determine, yeah, nah, you know what? On this little shift of decision making you made, you're a murderer. Fuck that. Manslaughter. Could have done 5 years. No. But the presiding judge asked me if I had anything to say. I thought about it. I said no. So when they took me away, for the 3rd time, I had refused to see the chaplain. I don't have anything to say to him. I don't feel like talking. I'll be seeing him soon enough as it is. All I care about right now is escaping the machinery of justice, seeing if there's any way out of the inevitable. They put me in a different cell. From this one, when I'm stretched out on my bunk, I see the sky, and that's all I see. I spend my days watching how the dwindling of colors turn day into night. Lying here, I put my hands behind my head and wait. I can't count the times I've wondered if there have ever been any instances of condemned men escaping their relentless machinery, disappearing before the execution, or breaking through the cordon of police. Then I blame myself every time for not having paid enough attention to accounts of executions. A man should always take into interest into those things. You never know what might happen. I'd read stories in the papers like everyone else, but there must have been books devoted to the subject that I had never been curious enough to look into. Maybe I would have found some accounts of escapes, and I might have discovered that in at least one of these instances, when the wheel had stopped, and in spite of all their unrelenting calculation, chance and luck had it at least once changed something, just once. In a way, I think that would have been enough. My heart would have taken over from there. The papers were always talking about the debt owed to society. What his fucking head, blood on the streets for a public display. Yeah, that's called justice. Just kill a man because he killed a man. That'll show him. You smoked a cigarette, you're going to smoke this whole carton. What is this, 80s parenting logic? Oh, you killed a man? Well, now you're going to have to be killed. Christ. That's just how it goes. Oh, God damn. According to them, it had to be paid, but that doesn't speak to the imagination. What really counted was the possibility of escape, a leap of freedom out of the implacable ritual. A wild run for it would give whatever chance for hope there was. Of course, hope meant being cut down in some street corner as you ran like mad by a random bullet. But when I really thought through, nothing was going to allow me such a luxury. Everything was against it. I would just be caught up in the machinery again. Despite my willingness to understand, I just couldn't accept such arrogant certainty. Because after all, there was really something ridiculously out of proportion between the verdict such certainty was based on and the imperturbable, Jesus Christ, do I speak English? Imperturbable march of events from the moment the verdict was announced. The fact that the sentence had been read at 8 o'clock at night and not 5 o'clock. The fact that it could have been an entirely different one. The fact that it had been decided by men who changed their underwear. The fact that it had been handed down in the name of some vague notion called the French or the German or the Chinese people. All of it seemed to detract from the seriousness of the decision. I was forced to admit, however, that from the moment it had been passed, its consequences became as real and as serious as the wall against which I pressed the length of my body. At times like this, I remembered a story my ma used to tell me about my father. I never knew him. Maybe the only thing I did know about the man was the story my ma would tell me back then. He'd gone to watch a murderer be executed. Just the thought of going had made him sick to his stomach. But he went anyway, and when he came back, he spent half the morning throwing up. I remember feeling a little disgusted by him at the time, but now I understood. It was perfectly normal. Jesus Christ, what's normal about that? To make that normal, to make that brutality your normal. And then people say that atheists like me have no convictions, no ethics, no morals. I even have a problem with this whole, God damn, I hate this. I hate this book. That's why I love it. This book pisses me off every time I fucking read it. Never fails. Just a thought of going but I understood it was perfectly normal. But how had I not seen that there was nothing more important than an execution, and that when you come right down to it, it was the only thing a man could truly be interested in? If I ever got out of this prison, I would go and watch every execution there was. But I think it was a mistake even to consider the possibility, because at the thought that one fine morning I would find myself a free man standing behind a cordon of police, on the outside, as it were, at the thought of being the spectator who comes to watch and then can go and throw up afterwards, a wave of poisoned joy raised up in my throat. But I wasn't being reasonable. It was a mistake to let myself get carried away with such imaginings, because the next minute I would be so cold I would curl up into a ball under my blanket and my teeth would be chattering and I couldn't make them stop. But naturally, you can't always be reasonable. At other times, for instance, I would make up new laws. I would reform the penal code. I'd realize that the most important thing, I mean, he's spending a lot of time in jail just waiting to die. If I were if I had no chance of appeal, if I were like, I'd just be like, do it now. Just pull out a gun, put it to my head, and get it over with. Like, what's the point of waiting? Like, you're costing taxpayers $40,000 on average a year to keep one man or one woman. I'm sorry, everyone can be in prison. One person in prison is $40,000 on average. Talk to somebody on Social Security how much they get, and if they get $40,000 a year from their stipend at the end of their retirement when they're 65, 67, 70. Ask them if they get in $4,000, 40 grand a year. Oh my God, they would giggle. No, I paid my house off years ago because I bought it in the 60s. Well, yeah. I realized that the most important thing was to give the condemned man a chance. Even 1 in 1,000 was good enough to set things right. It's like Benjamin Franklin said, I'd rather let 1,000 condemned men free than let one innocent man be hanged. So it seemed to me that you could come up with a mixture of chemicals that, if ingested by the patient, that's the word I'd use, patient, would kill him 9 times out of 10. But he would know this, that he would be the one condition. For by giving it some hard thought, by considering the whole thing calmly, I could see that the trouble with the guillotine was that you had no chance at all, absolutely nothing, unless it was dull as shit. Then you had to get a couple of whacks. It's not the first time, wouldn't be the last. They stopped using it, shortly after this book was written? Oh yeah, that's right. This is one of the things that got the guillotine stopped in France and in French colonies. Why does this book piss people off? I wonder why. The fact was that it had been decided once and for all that the patient was to die. It was an open and shut case, a fixed arrangement, a tacit agreement that there was no question of going back on. If by some extraordinary chance the blade failed, they would just start over. What did I just say? I forgot that was written in the book. I forgot that was in there. My bad. They would just start over. So the thing that bothered me most was that the condemned man had to hope the machine worked the first time. I just said this. And I say that's wrong. And in a way, I was right. But in another way, I was forced to admit that that was the whole secret of a good organization. In other words, the condemned man was forced into a kind of moral collaboration. It was in his interest that everything go off without a hitch. Yeah, I don't want 3 hacks, 4 hacks at my neck. Head hanging off by sinews on your throat, barely decapitated, still spinal. Oh my God, that's torture. That's literal torture. They were doing this in the 1900s. This is not a book about medieval France. Monsieur Guillotine himself died from a fucking guillotine. He got his head chopped off. So Winchester, the same way, I think, right? Wasn't it Winchester? I know they had the haunted house because of it. His wife was all superstitious and shit. And in a way I was right, but in another way I was forced to admit, okay, in other words, yeah, I was also made to see that until the moment I'd made mistaken ideas about these things. For a long time I had believed, I don't know why, that to get to the guillotine you had to climb the stairs onto a scaffold. I think it was because of the French Revolution. I mean, because of everything I'd been taught or shown about it. But one morning I remembered seeing a photograph that appeared in the papers and at the time of a much talked about execution. In reality, the machine was set up right on the ground, as simple as you please. It was much narrower than I thought. It was funny, I had never noticed that before. I'd been struck by this picture because the guillotine looked like such a precision instrument, perfect and gleaming. You always get exaggerated notions of things you don't know anything about. Very, 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 very true. Oh my God. You always get exaggerated notions of things you don't know anything about. Hold on. I got a highlighter for that, sure. Oh shit. Yeah, that one's you always get exaggerated notions of things you don't know anything about. I was made to see that the contrary to what I thought, everything was very simple. The guillotine is on the same level as the man approaching it. He walks up to it the way we would walk up to another person. That bothered me too. Mounting the scaffold, going right up into the sky where something in the imagination could hold on to. Whereas once again, the machine destroyed everything. You were killed discreetly, while a little shame and a little great precision. There were two other things that I was always thinking about: the dawn and my appeal. I would reason with myself, though, and try not to think about them anymore. I would stretch out, look at the sky, and force myself to find something interesting about it. It would turn green. That was evening. I would make another effort to divert my thoughts. I would listen to my heartbeat. I couldn't imagine that this was a sound which had been with me for so long, could never, ever stop. I've never really had much of an imagination. That's cool. You're good, man. But I still, but still, I would. Oh, you have me on the television. That's weird. I'm on TV. Hi, mom. But still, I would try to picture the exact moment when the beating of my heart would no longer be going on inside my head. But it was no use. The dawn or my appeal would still be there. I would end up telling myself that the most rational thing was not to hold myself back. I always came at dawn. I knew that. And so I spent my nights waiting for that dawn. I never liked being surprised. If something is going to happen to me, I want it to be there. That's when I ended up sleeping only a little bit during the day and then all night long waited patiently for the first light to show on the pane of the sky. The hardest time was the uncertain hour when I knew they usually set to work. After midnight, I would wait and watch. My ears would never hear so many noises or picked up such small sounds. One thing I can say, though, is that in a certain way I was lucky that the whole time since I never heard footsteps. My mom used to say that you can always find something to be happy about. In my prison, when the sky turned red and a new day slipped into my cell, I found out she was right, because I might just as easily have heard footsteps and my heart could have burst. Even though I would rush to the door at the slightest shuffle, even though with my ear pressed to the wood I would wait frantically until I heard the sound of my own breathing, terrified to find it so hoarse, like a dog's panting, my heart would not burst after all, and I would have gained another 24 hours. Suffered another 24 hours. Which one is it really? Gained? What has he gained in this circumstance? It's kind of a sarcastic comment by the author. All day long, there was the thought of my appeal. I think I got everything out of it I could. I'm trying to see how many pages we have left here. Oh, a lot. Okay, not too many. Let's get through this. Let's just grind. Thinking that I got everything out of it I would assess my holdings and get the maximum return on my thoughts. I would always begin with assuming the worst. My appeal was denied. Well, so I'm going to die. Sooner than other people will, obviously, but everybody knows life isn't worth living. Deep down, I knew perfectly that it doesn't matter much whether you die at 30 or at 70, since in either case, other men or women will naturally go on limiting, and for thousands of years. In fact, nothing could be clearer. Whether it was now or 20 years from now, I would still be the one dying. At that point, I mean, it's like he's already dead. What's the point? At that point, What would disturb my train of thought was the terrifying leap I would feel my heart take at the idea of having 20 more years of life ahead of me. I'd be thinking in 20 years when it would all come down to the same thing anyway, since we're all going to die, it's obvious that when and how don't matter. Therefore, and the difficult thing was not to lose sight of the reasoning that went into my therefore, I had to accept the rejection of my appeal. So at least he's, got the resolve now. Then and only then would I have the right, so to speak, would I give myself permission, as it were, to consider the alternative hypothesis. I was pardoned. The trouble was that I would somehow have to cool the hot blood that was suddenly surged through my body and sting my eyes with a delirious joy. It would all take over my strength to quiet my heart, to be rational. In order to make my resignation to the first hypothesis more plausible, I had to be level headed about this one as well. If I succeeded, I gained an hour of calm. That was something, anyway. It was at one such moment that I once again refused to see the chaplain. God, stop sending the priest over. I'm good. I was lying down, and I could tell from the golden glow in the sky that the evening was coming on. I had just denied my appeal, and I could feel the steady pulse in my blood circulating inside of me. I didn't need to see the chaplain. For the first time in a long time, I thought about Marie. The days had been long since she'd stopped writing. That evening, I thought about it and told myself that maybe she had gotten tired of being the girlfriend of a condemned man. It also occurred to me that maybe she was sick or dead. These things happen. How was I to know? Since apart from our two bodies, now separated, there wasn't anything to keep us together or even to remind us of each other. Anyway, after that, remembering Marie meant nothing to me. I wasn't interested in her dead. That seemed perfectly normal to me, since I understood very well that most people forget me when I was dead. It wouldn't have anything more to do with me. I wasn't even able to tell myself that it was hard to think those things. It was at the exact moment the chaplain came in. When I saw him, I felt a little shudder go through me. He noticed it and told me not to be afraid. Oh, don't be afraid. Nobody's fucking afraid. We just don't want to have to deal with your ass telling me we're born sinners. You've got the cure. Got it. I was born evil. You've got the cure. And it's this guy that lived 2,000 years ago. We got the MLM from 2,000 years ago. We get it. Yes, I called your religions an MLM from 2,000 years ago. Fucking deal with it. Don't give a fuck. This is my channel. I can say those things. Deplatform me. I don't care. I told him that it wasn't his usual time. He replied that it was just a friendly visit and it had nothing to do with my appeal, which he knew nothing about. He sat down on my bunk and invited me to sit next to him. I refused. All the same, there was something very gentle about him, usually is. He sat there for a few seconds, leaning forward, with his elbows on his knees, looking at his hands. They were slender and sinewy, and they reminded me of two nimble animals. He slowly rubbed one against the other. Then he sat there, leaning forward like that for so long that in an instant I seemed to forget he was there. But suddenly he raised his hand and looked straight at me. Why have you refused to see me? He asked. I said that I didn't believe in God. He wanted to know if I was sure, and I said that I didn't see any reason to ask myself that question. It seemed unimportant. So I keep on explaining that to people, and it's not that it's unimportant. It's just like it's more important to you than it is to me, man. He then leaned back against the wall, hands flat on his thighs, almost as if it wasn't me he was talking to. He remarked that sometimes we think we're sure when in fact we're not. God, the self-importance of it all. Jesus Christ, we got the reason. We've got the answers. Shut up. No, you don't. Nobody has the fucking answers. You want to know what happens after life? Compost. Other than that, we'll find out. All of us will fucking find out eventually. That's kind of the point of this book. See? The void on the front? Yeah, that's the whole point. Wouldn't read something other than something nihilistic on my channel. So it's just not going to happen. He then leaned against the wall, his hands flat on his sides, almost as if he wasn't talking. It wasn't me he was talking to. He remarked that sometimes we're not sure when in fact we're not. I didn't say anything. He looked at me and asked, "What do you think?" I said it was possible. In any case, I may not have been sure about what really did interest me, but I was absolutely sure about what didn't. And it just so happened that what he was talking about didn't interest me. He looked away and without moving asked me if I wasn't talking that way out of extreme despair. God, that one too. The imposition of like, oh well, you must be suffering or else you wouldn't feel that way against God. It's like, why would you think that I saw God that way because it's through your lens? You moron. That's, say it with me, retarded, because we're retarding thought and the progress of it. It's not a pejorative term. I'm not saying it is a slur to anyone with a disability. Obviously, you guys know me. That would be kind of weird in my position, wouldn't it now? And it just so happened, yeah. He looked away and without moving asked me if I wasn't talking that way about extreme. I explained to him that it wasn't desperate. I was just afraid, which was only natural. Then God can help you, he said. Every man I have known in your position has turned to him. I acknowledged that that was their right. It also meant that they must have had the time for it. As for me, I didn't want anyone's help, and it didn't have the time to interest myself in what didn't interest me. It's kind of the point. At that point, he threw up his hands in annoyance, then sat forward and smoothed out the folds of his cassock. When he had finished, he started at it again, addressing me as my friend, as if he was talking to me this way. It wasn't because I was condemned to die. The way he saw it, we were all condemned to die. The Christian outlook, so fatalistic. But I interrupted him by saying it wasn't the same thing, and that, besides, it wouldn't be a consolation anyway. Certainly, he agreed. But if you don't die today, you'll die tomorrow or the next day, and then the same question will arise: how will you face that terrifying ordeal? I said that I would face it exactly as I was facing it right now. At that, he stood up and looked at me straight in the eye. It was a game I knew well. I played it with a lot with Emmanuel and Celeste, and usually there were other ones who were the ones that looked away. The chaplain knew the game well too. I could tell right away. His gaze never faltered, and his voice didn't falter either when he said, "Have you no hope at all? And do you really live with the thought that when you die and nothing remains?" Yes. Yes, I said. And he lowered his head and sat back down. He told me that he pitied me. God, pity. Oh, the most useless human emotion, pity. God, that's like cancer to the soul of what the real soul of a human is. To the progress of man, pity. Ugh, it's like taking sympathy and making it gross. He thought it was more than a man could bear. I didn't feel anything except that he was beginning to annoy me. Then I turned away and went and stood under the skylight. I leaned my shoulder against the wall without really following what he was saying. I heard him start asking me questions again. He was talking in an agitated, urgent voice. I could see that he was genuinely upset, so I listened more closely, as a human would do. He was expressing his certainty that my appeal would be granted, but I was carrying the burden of a sin from which I had to free myself. According to him, human justice was nothing, and divine justice was everything. I pointed out that it was the former that had condemned me. His response was that it hadn't washed away my sin for all of that. I told him that I didn't know what sin was. All they had told me that I was guilty. I was guilty. I was paying for it. Nothing more could be asked of me. At that point, he stood up again, and the thought occurred to me that in such a narrow cell, if he wanted to move around and didn't have many options, he could either sit down or stand up. I was staring at the ground. He took a step toward me and stopped as if he didn't dare come any closer. He looked at the sky through the bars. "You're wrong, my son." Went from my friend to my son. Oh, Jesus, he's getting serious now. He said, "More could be asked of you, and it may be asked." And what's that? You could be asked to see. See what? The priest gazed around my cell and answered in a voice that sounded very weary to me. "Every stone here sweats with suffering. I know that. I've never looked at them without feeling anguish, but deep in my heart, I know that the most wretched among you have seen a divine face emerge from their darkness. That is the face you are asked to see. This perked me up a little. I said I had been looking at the stones in the walls for months. There wasn't anything or anyone in the world I knew better. Maybe at one time, way back, I had searched for a face in them, but the face I was looking for was as bright as the sun and the flame of desire, and it belonged to Marie. I had searched for it in vain. Now it was all over. And in any case, I had never seen anything emerge from the sweating stones. The chaplain looked at me with a kind of sadness. I now had my back flat up against the wall. Light was swimming over my forehead. He muttered a few words I didn't catch and abruptly asked if he could embrace me. No, I said. He turned and walked over to the wall and slowly ran his hand over it. Do you really love this earth as much as all of that? He murmured. What the hell sort of question? Do you really love this earth? What are you talking about? What is there to love? I'm in a cell ready to die here. I didn't answer. He stood there with his back to me for quite a long time. His presence was grating and oppressive. Most religious figures are. Pitiable. Get it? Pitiable. I was just about to tell him to go, to leave me alone, when all of a sudden, turning toward me, he burst out, No, I refuse to believe you. I know that at one time or another, you wished for another life. I said, of course I had, but it didn't mean any more than I had been wishing to be rich, to be able to swim faster, to have more nicely shaped mouth. Maybe better teeth for me, yes. A few more, maybe. It was all the same. But he stopped me and wanted to know how I pictured this other life. Then I shouted at him, one where I could remember this life. And that's when I told him that I had had enough. He wanted to talk to me about God again, but I went to him and made one last attempt to explain that I had only a little time left and I didn't want to waste it on God. He tried to change the subject by asking me why I was calling him Monsieur and not Father. Then he got mad, and I told him he wasn't my father. He wasn't even on my side. Yes, my son, he said, putting his hand on my shoulder. I am on your side, but you have no way of knowing it because your heart is blind. I shall pray for you. God, I hate these cheesy fucks. Seriously, if you're going to pray for me, you can tell me. I get it. It's your religion. If you want to say, hey, I'm going to pray for you, okay, thanks. Just leave it at that. Just leave it at that. If your religion requires first names, ask for them, and that's fine. I know you got to talk to the big man directly. I know ecclesiastical church as well. I do live in the South. Then I don't know why, but something inside me snapped. I started yelling at the top of my lungs, and I insulted him. Oh, motherfucker, probably. Told him not to waste his prayers on me. I think I've told people that a few times. Yeah, don't bother praying for me. I don't want your prayers. Jesus. I grabbed him by the collar of his cassock. I was pouring out on him everything that was in my heart. Cries of anger, cries of joy. Isn't that what religion's there for, huh? He seemed so certain about everything, didn't he? A smoke bastard. And yet none of his certainties was worth one hair of a woman's head. He wasn't even sure he was alive, because he was living like a dead man. I told you, it was a death cult. Christianity is a death cult. Deal with it. Whereas it looked as if I was the one who had come out empty-handed. But I was sure about me, about everything, surer than he could ever be, sure of my life, and sure of the death I had waiting for me. Yes, that was all I had. But at least I had as much of a hold on it as it had a hold on me. I had been right. I was still right. I was always right. I had lived my life one way and I could just as well have lived it another. I had done this and I hadn't done that. I hadn't done this thing and I had done another. And so it was as if I had waited all this time for a moment and not for the first light of this dawn to be vindicated. Nothing mattered. And I knew why. So did he. Throughout the whole absurd life I had lived, a dark wind had been rising toward me from somewhere deep in my future, across years that were still to come, and as it passed, the wind leveled whatever was offered to me at the time, in years no more real than ones I was living. What did other people's deaths or a mother's love matter to me? What did his God or the lives people choose or the fate they think they elect matter to me when we're all elected by the same fate? Me and billions of privileged people like him who also call themselves my brothers? Couldn't he see? Couldn't he see that? Everybody was privileged. Here's your participation trophy, honey. Everybody was privileged. There were only privileged people. The others would all be condemned one day, and he would be condemned too. What would it matter if he were accused of murder and then executed because he didn't cry at his mother's funeral? Salamano's dog was worth just as much as his wife. The little robot woman was just as guilty as the Parisian woman Masson married, or as Marie who had wanted me to marry her. What did it matter that Raymond was as much a friend as Celeste, who was worth a lot more than him? What did it matter that Marie now offered her lips to a Marisol? Couldn't he, couldn't this condemned man see? And from that, somewhere deep in my future, all that shouting had me gasping for air. But they were already tearing the chaplain from my grip, and the guards were threatening me. He calmed them, though, and looked at me for a moment without saying anything. His eyes were full of tears. And he turned and disappeared. You ever break a faithful man? Once again, I have. And yeah, the tears came for me when I was broken. I was a religious man at one point in time. I left. Everybody has free will. Even your religions say so. All of them, almost all of them. I mean, not the predestination ones. You guys, I guess you're fucked from go. With him gone, I was able to calm myself down again. Here's the end of the book, by the way, for those waiting for the Cliff Notes ending. I was exhausted and threw myself on the bunk. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up with stars in my face. Sounds of the countrysides were drifting in. Smells of night, earth, and salt air were cooling my temples. The wondrous peace of that sleeping summer flowed through me like a tide. Then, in the dark hour before dawn, sirens blasted. They were announcing departure for the world that now and forever meant nothing to me. For the first time in a long time, I thought about Maman. I felt as if I understood why at the end of her life she had taken a fiancé, why she had played at beginning again, even there in the home where lives were fading out. Evening was a kind of wistful respite, so close to death. My mom must have felt free and then ready to live it all again. Nobody had the right to cry over her, and I felt ready to live it all again too, as if that blind rage had washed me clean, rid me of hope. For the first time that night alive with signs and stars, I opened myself to the gentle indifference of the world, finding it so much like myself, so like a brother, really. I felt that I had been happy, and that I was happy again. For everything to be consummated, for me to feel less alone, I had only to wish that there had been a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution, and that they greet me with cries of hate. Sorry, guys. Sorry, I've given that speech about 18 times, and it never gets old. Like, ever. How much better does it get than hoping when you die you have a crowd of people screaming at you with hate? That's how I want to go out. Either that or just in my sleep. I guess that way it'd be a little easier. But yeah, so dark little book for you. The Nobel Prize, Literature, 1957. One of the best books ever written. It says vintage on the binder, and I bought this in the 90s, so. Vintage International. You can still get this. This is a pirate PDF it. I don't know. It's probably not open source yet. But yeah, That was The Stranger by Albert Camus. Thank you for taking a little time out of your day to stare into the void. And I'll remind you, as Nietzsche once famously penned, beware those that stare into the void. The void also stares back into you. Take it easy, folks.